Hi everybody, welcome to Monday morning's Indycar on the 15th of October. Now, as predicted in the last few days, the European Union was on the brink of coming to a historic agreement with the British state over its exit from the European Union. In other words, they thought that they had come up with a deal which would allow Britain to exit the EU in a relatively orderly manner, and for all the loose ends to be tied up and all the payments to be made, and for the two entities to separate. But the problem has always been Ireland. The problem will always be Ireland. Boris Johnson said that if Northern Ireland was to stay in the customs union or as part of the EU, then it would be the equivalent of Northern Ireland being annexed by a foreign power. Now, this said without a hint of irony, considering the fact that the British state has annexed the 6 counties of Northern Ireland for the last few hundred years. So what do you do about it? Well, it seems that there are only possibly 2 options left now. Those are a no-deal Brexit, which is what Europe is now having to contemplate reluctantly doing, or the UK relinquishes its hold over Northern Ireland and allows the 6 counties of Northern Ireland to become a small independent municipality, something which can be supported by the south of Ireland, possibly by the European Union, in order for it to remain in a frictionless border relationship with the south of Ireland. The problem with that, obviously, is the unionist parties. The unionist parties will spit bullets over this. It will reignite the sectarian divide, and problems will ensue. So the issue is never ever going to be soluble by simply asking the European Union to do something that it can't do. The British government knew this 2 years ago. They were told it repeatedly for 2 years that this was going to happen. They knew it was going to happen, and now it's happened. And it's as if the British public have been led along the garden path, believing that somehow or other there was a magic wand that can be waved over Northern Ireland and make this nasty problem go away. You can't. The nasty problem was created by the British state. It was created by Britain annexing a part of Ireland. And now that those last 6 counties are the stumbling block to an entire nation, leaving an entire club of nations, maybe the British state can see now why they should relinquish their grip on the remaining parts of these islands which they still have control over. Because if England really wants to leave the European Union, then it has to pay the price of that. And the price of that is releasing its grip on Ireland, on Scotland and on Wales, and allowing these other parts of what's known as the UK to do what they want, because Britain is not Scotland. Scotland is not Britain. Britain doesn't actually exist. It's just the island that we all inhabit. The problem is that England wants Brexit and nobody else seems to. It's been said actually that Wales voted for Brexit, and they did. It was a narrow vote, same as England, very, very narrow vote. But the problem with Wales is it's entirely dependent on England for just about everything. And unless Wales can somehow recreate a self-sustaining economy, it's going to be stuck with England for the time being. So perhaps there isn't anything we can do to help Wales just now. However, it doesn't solve the current problem, which is that we're heading inevitably now towards no deal, because there's no way the British state is going to give up its grip on Ireland, and there is no way the DUP is going to permit the British state to do that, and there is no way that there can be a solid border across the island of Ireland. Plus, the Irish state is probably the one country which nobody has talked about the damage that is going to be done by British Brexit to the Republic of Ireland. And the Republic of Ireland is going to require help from the European Union to patch up the problems that England's Brexit are causing them. It's not just a case of England wants something and that doesn't affect anybody else. England wants something that affects and damages dozens of other countries. And the selfishness of the people who voted for Brexit is absolutely breathtaking. That they would be happy to destroy the economy of Scotland, to cause near civil war in Northern Ireland, just so that they can stop a few immigrants coming across the border into England. That's really all this is about. And all of this because of people like Boris Johnson. Jean-Claude Juncker said recently in a speech at the European Union's Parliament that the main heroes of Brexit, the early heroes of Brexit, as soon as the deal was done, instantly resigned. And as he pointed out, patriots don't resign when they're successful in a rebellion. They stay and they see it through to the end. And yet these cowards, because that's what they are, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, David Davis, all resigned as soon as the thing they were fighting for was won. That's not the action of a patriot. It's not the action of men who have their country's best interests at heart. Those are the actions of men who are too scared to follow through on what they started. They've caused all of this. Boris Johnson, actually, and his compatriots, Nigel Farage and the rest of them, if this damages the country as badly as it's expected to, these guys should really be in jail, because they have caused more hardship, more poverty, more cost to the economy of the entire nation and all the nations of Europe than anybody else has ever done. I mean, it's the equivalent of damaging all of Europe through warfare. And by doing so, they end up hurting their own people. And then, instead of seeing through this wonderful dream of Brexit, they bottle it. Anyway, I'm getting a bit annoyed, sorry. Get back to the point. The point now is that, as far as Scotland is concerned at least, we really face now the future of a no-deal Brexit, a chaotic leaving of the EU, where nothing is settled and no deal has been struck. There isn't time now to do a deal. They can't even get the business of leaving the EU right, never mind doing a trade deal afterwards. They're so inept and stupid and so careless of other people's lives that they were happy to basically throw Ireland to the dogs, to throw Scotland's economy in the bin, and go their separate way, because that's what they wanted. The UK doesn't work anymore. They've just proved that now, that it's the death throes of the British Empire. It's now finished, because not even the four parts of the United Kingdom which originally made it up after they were conquered or stolen or annexed by England, not even those parts now can be held together. Brexit is forcing them apart. It's like magnets repelling each other. You cannot push the two things together. They cannot be pushed together. There is no way to square a circle. So that leaves us in the situation of Scotland desperately now needing to vote on this, because this uncertainty isn't going to stop. No matter what happens next, it's not going to be good. Whatever happens next is going to be really bad for Scotland. We're either going to have a relatively, and I say relatively, smooth exit from Europe with no deal, which is still a no-deal Brexit, by the way, sometimes termed a blind Brexit because we don't know if there'll be a deal, or we have no exit agreement at all and no deal, which is the worst of all situations. Now, the government can say that they will continue to negotiate all the way up to and through the Brexit process and beyond the 29th of March, but they still cannot come to an agreement, because their red lines make it impossible for any kind of trade connection with Europe whatsoever, and they make it impossible for any kind of smooth transition, any kind of smooth trade between the north and south of Ireland, unless Ireland is set free from the UK and allowed to gradually reunify with the rest of Ireland over time, because there is no other solution. This is the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it, but Ireland needs to be put back together again. Scotland needs to leave the UK and pursue its own aims, and England, if it wants to Brexit, should do that, but suffer the consequences of it. there are costs involved, and the English Brexiteers didn't care what the costs were at the time when they started their arguments for this. The BBC must bear some responsibility for this. They gave Nigel Farage fantastically large amounts of airtime over many, many years to argue for Brexit. They gave him the oxygen. They gave him every opportunity to push and push and push for Brexit. And eventually they get Brexit. And now the BBC is complaining about it and saying how bad it all is. Well, they helped Nigel Farage to do it. They helped Boris Johnson to do it. They helped David Davis to do it, and many, many others. So the British media has to also hold its hands up to some of this, to responsibility for some of this. They helped to make this happen. They helped to convince the English electorate to do it by these lies, by all of these lies, these messages on buses, these nice little sound bites about taking back control and making Britain great again. All this was nonsense. It was just hot air rhetoric. Scotland now has the opportunity to do something interesting. Quite apart from voting for independence, which is going to have to happen anyway, there is still this issue of the Scottish Continuity Bill, the one which was supposedly ruled as sort of unlawful. In other words, it wasn't within the competence of the Scottish Parliament, and that went to the Supreme Court. Have we heard anything yet back about that? If it fails at the Supreme Court and it's knocked back, it can then be taken to the European courts and it can be decided there. And if it's decided that Scotland was competent to create its own bill to protect its own industries and its own connections to Europe, then that opens a very interesting possibility, and that would be that even before we leave the UK, we can legislate to adopt a constitution for the country before we even vote to leave. Now, if that happens, then there is, in law, a concrete proposal about what Scotland will be after we are independent. In other words, it can't be changed. Once the constitution is in place, the new nation is founded. Whether it's still part of the Union or not, Scotland will be a newly founded state just before we vote on leaving or staying with the UK. And that's an interesting possibility that's cropped up just in the last few days. If anybody knows how things have gone with the Supreme Court, let me know. I can't remember exactly what happened in the last few months on this, but I'll check and find out. But if it turns out that they knocked it back and we take it to the European courts, then we have every chance then of winning the right through European law to have our own constitution adopted formally at Holyrood and found a new country before we even vote to leave the UK. Now that would be a historical moment, to found a country before it's free of the Union, and to re-establish the sovereignty of the people in a formal legal way. And that would overwrite anything that the British state might try to do to us, because we would be recognised by the European courts as a new country. And that might also afford us the right to talk to the European Union even before we leave the UK. Because as a newly founded state, even as part of a union with the UK, we would have the right, as a newly founded state, in European law and in Scots law, to negotiate our own terms with the EU, whether we were in the UK or not. Now that would be a fascinating new crisis for the British government to have to deal with. Anyway, those are the main points of the situation today. We're sitting in currently in the usual kind of funk of uncertainty which Britain likes to keep us in, where we look like we're now going to be exiting in a hard Brexit with no deal whatsoever. And I think that's been the trajectory all along. It's been the course that the UK has been plotting from the beginning. Scotland, though, has, as I say, a unique opportunity to legislate, to have its own constitution and to form itself as a new state before we vote to leave the UK. And I think that possibility is getting closer and closer. Have a great day. I'll see you all later. Bye for now.